Easter this morning. Part of the story as it's recorded by St. Matthew in chapter 28. And I know that you have the reading on the back of your worship leaflet. I'm not too sure whether that is from my particular translation. It makes no difference. There may be some minor variations between what you hear me say and what you read. But as I often say, the use of different translations very often helps to illuminate the meaning of the text. So I have no particular problem with that. I happen to very much appreciate this translation. I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again. I know that there are some people who have taken my advice and have secured a copy of this. They are available, I think, down at the Catholic bookstore across from St. Joseph's, and in other Christian bookstores too, come to that. It's called the New Living Translation. And what I like about it is that it's easy to read, it is understandable, and it also, unlike some modern translations, reads very well in public. Not just privately sitting at home with the Bible open and reading it silently, but also for those of us who read it aloud to a group. I find myself that it's very easy to read that way. Anyway, Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. Early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. Then the angel spoke to the women. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come see where his body was lying. And now go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you." The women ran quickly from the tomb. They were very frightened, but also filled with great joy. And they rushed to give the disciples the angel's message. And as they went, Jesus met them and greeted them. And they ran to him, grasped his feet, and worshipped him. And then Jesus said to them, "Don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there." I draw your attention to those words, "Don't be afraid." Don't be afraid. And then from another translation, "So they left the tomb in a hurry, afraid, and yet filled with joy." And that's the title of the message this morning, "Afraid and yet filled with joy." The word afraid, as I will say in a few moments, that is a very personal word for me, a very personal experience for me. I find it, as a Christian and as a preacher, remarkable how many times this word, or words like it, can be found in the Easter story. 4 times here in the account that Matthew gives, and another 6 times in the other Gospels, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, I don't know about you, but for myself, and I think for most people, we don't usually associate the experience of fear with Easter. Not an hour removed of 2,000 years. But there it is on the witness of the gospel writers. Fear. And I say rhetorically, after all, why not? Why not? There was the fear that the soldiers experienced, who had been on guard at the tomb, as they witnessed the violent rolling back of the stone at the entrance to the tomb. Their experience of the appearance of the angel, and the fact that they found that there was no body inside the tomb. That could have meant doom for them, which is to say, they had been sent to guard that body. That is why the tomb had a stone across the entrance and had been sealed with the seal of the Roman governor. Their lives were probably at stake because of the rolling back of the stone and the disappearance of the body. There was the fear of the women as they encountered the angelic being, and later the presence of Jesus himself. The experience of uncertainty, the experience of doubt, the experience of fear. The fear of the disciples later as they encountered the risen Lord. Fear. And again I say fear, and why not? Do we find that so strange that in the face of an experience like this, there was fear? My dear friends, fear is a part of the human experience that we know. I don't think there is probably any one of us here. If there is, I would appreciate hearing about it later. I don't think there is anyone here who has not experienced fear more than once in their lives. And maybe some here have experienced fear as early as after rising from bed this morning, for all that I know. I know that the experience of fear is a part of the human experience. It has been a part of my life. I alluded to that a moment ago. The very personal sense and feeling and appreciation that I have for the word afraid. My life, at any rate, I have experienced, I have known fear. I must say, with thanksgiving to God, not so much now as an adult, but I certainly experienced fear when I was a child. Because when I was very young, and I mean maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5, I don't know, certainly before I went to school, I was tormented by nightmares. If any of you, especially as a child, have a memory of being tormented by nightmares, you may know what I experienced. I would scream in the midst of the dream. And it was one of those dreams, most unusual, maybe because it was my age. I mentioned this at the early service for Andy's benefit. I say that. I can remember at the time that the dream was just a sense of fear. There was no particular image of a monster or something coming after me. All I could remember is moving colors and the overwhelming sense of fear. And apparently I would scream out in the middle of the night, like sometimes happens, we are told, in dreams, or we experience it. We try to scream, and we don't think we are. Trust me, we are. Our spouse, if we are married and have a spouse with us, they know we are. My mother and father certainly knew that I was being troubled by something. And I don't know that it happened every night, but God knows maybe it did. And my father very often was the one who would come in and gather me up. And thank you. I understand. It may not be diverting to you, but unfortunately it diverts me. I have a hard time concentrating. That may be part of the backlash from the nightmares that I had. I don't know. But anyway, I would wake up sitting on the toilet. That's when I would come to. I was so deep in sleep that my father could take me out of bed and carry me into the bathroom and sit me on the hopper until I would come to. Anyway, I was tormented by nightmares. I still dream. Fortunately, thanks be to God, I don't have nightmares as an adult. I have an active dream life. Most of us do. All of us dream, whether we remember them in the morning or not, is beside the point. The fact is we do. It's a part of how we are built as human beings. The need of our mind to keep turning over. And so fortunately, my dreams these days don't involve usually fear. Sometimes uncertainty, sometimes doubt. But certainly they are not nightmares. Some of the dreams are wild and wonderful, Andrew. And all of us, I suppose, we could share wild and wonderful dreams. Well, with that remark, I'll pass on. Well, the thing is, I don't think I have ever gotten over that experience as a child. It's interesting how things like that from childhood can mark us. And we very often don't know, except we have a vague sense that who we are as adults is a result of what we were and what we experienced as children. It stands to reason, doesn't it? Well, as I say, not that I still have those nightmares, but having had them as a very young child, I think marked me for life. And I have evidence of that because I will say to you, I tend to be a very cautious person. I'm not one that very often takes, in fact I don't, if I can avoid it, I don't take risks. I'm not a risk taker. There's no way that you would get me to jump on a bungee cord for one minute or to dive out of an airplane with a parachute. I might not even do it if my life was at stake. Somebody would have often said if I was on an airplane with a parachute on my back, somebody would have to kick me out of the plane and get me to go down. Well, I tend to be a very careful person, cautious to a fault. I tend to be type A personality, perfection-driven. I'm often negative. That may not be known to you who don't know me well, but those of you who might have occasion, I tend to be easily upset. I can be cranky. I was at the 8:15 service, wasn't I? Where I thought there was something wrong with the battery pack, I wasn't coming through. It was called my attention again. And I said, I have a bad word going through my mind. I didn't use it at the moment. I did later on. But of course, what I discovered was that it wasn't the fault of the person in the back. It wasn't Donna Kelly's fault. Whose fault was it? It was my fault. In this life, I'm going on at a great rate, aren't I? You're kind of getting off the track. I love to do that. It's going down rabbit tracks. Sometimes I can't get back to what I should be saying. But, no, now you see I've gotten off the track and I forget what I wanted to say here. Not about the message, but about the other thing. Well, maybe God is saying, get back to your sermon. Well, anyway, I tend to have a very low tolerance for interruptions, for things that get in the way. I can be very impatient, and very often, frankly, impatient with myself, as well as being impatient with other people. I tend to see the glass, what, half empty. I rarely see it as half full. So that I'm not basically a positive person. I try to compensate in the interest of a good ministry, and I guess to a degree I am successful at that. But I also must admit that in part I think it was because of the nightmares, other things too I suppose, that I also have a tendency to bring doubt into my faith as a Christian. Now that may come as a surprise to you. It should. It should, because most Christians, and we ought to be free to admit it, most Christians do experience religious faith as it has been taught to us. And if we are honest with ourselves, we think we understand that there may be some doubt. We're not quite able to wrap not just our minds around it, but we're not able to wrap our lives and our hearts around it. I've often said that if I were transported back to the time of Jesus, I would be the man who would say to Jesus, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Remember that? He had come to Jesus and asked for an experience of healing for his child. And Jesus said, of course I will. Do you believe? And what did the man say? Lord, I believe. But then he went on and said, help my unbelief. Now, the healing went on, thanks be to God. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Or I'd be the disciple Thomas. I've often said that if I had a saint's name that I should have attached to myself, it would be the Apostle Thomas. What was Thomas's experience in Jerusalem when the other disciples had experienced the resurrected Lord? And they said to Thomas, oh, wonderful, Jesus has been resurrected. And Thomas said, well, how do you know that? These are my words. And they said, well, he has appeared to us. You weren't here at the time, but he manifested himself to us in his resurrection body. And Thomas said, well, I can't believe that. I won't believe that. Until Jesus manifests himself to me personally. The gospel account gives Thomas's words in this way, unless I see the scars of the nails in his hands, and put my finger on those scars and my hand in his side, I will not believe. So why he is sometimes called Doubting Thomas. Well, of all of the disciples, he's the one that I relate to the most. I don't take particular pride in that, but I do tell you that's my experience of the Christian faith. And you may say to yourself, well, why are you in ministry? Well, I believe I was called by God to be in ministry. And remember what Jesus said to his disciples, I have chosen you, you didn't choose me. Well, I have felt that.